This video is brought to you by Midway USA. Support the channel by choosing Midway for your shooting and outdoor supplies.
Once upon a time, the AK community used to be fun. We learned about these things and its shrouded mystery while buying very cheap ammunition to blast into dirt or shoot targets all day long without breaking the bank. These things were also affordable. Military factory-made semi-auto versions of what the military equivalent was. No questions on whether it would work or whether it would perform as intended. But then, ammunition ran dry. 545 ceased importation. Less and less of these things. So, all right, well, let's look for the 556 AK, as much of a heresy as that is, because that was a heresy back in the day. But no, there were some military manufacturing facilities who were making great 556 AKs, like this Polish Vizor 96, the barrel. But then, as of last year in 2024, we said bye-bye to the barrel line as well. It's very sad. So now in 2025, as a lot of old school AK community guys are looking for what kind of 556 AKs are there to shoot, may I offer you guys an alternative? Don't knock it until you try it.
Ah, yes, the AK community. I think I'm a part of this community in a certain way because I am attracted to some of these older AK collectible AKs that are out there. And the AK community is weird, but I think currently the old school AK collectors and the AK community, let's say from the 80s to the 2010s era, guys who were able to buy like SLR 104 series rifles for like $9.99 and shoot pallets of ammunition. That version of the AK community, I think, is becoming continuously more and more disenchanted with the current AK market offerings. And part of that is because of how commercialized it's gotten. But I think the explanation is a little bit more nuanced than that. But more importantly, a theory that I've been developing in the last month or so is that I think roller delayed systems, especially the H&K clones that are currently coming out of Turkey, have a very serious potential in attracting these AK enjoyer chads out there. But it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because of course, yes, I know these are West German, dirty, capitalist rifles, but let me get to that point in a bit, and you tell me if my assessment is right or wrong. But let's start off with the biggest question. What are AK people attracted to? Now, I've looked around and I think my generation of the AK community is generally attracted to military manufactured items. Now, this could be, it's manufactured in a military supplying factory or a military adjacent supplier. But more importantly, these are rifles or firearms that have a storied past and are manufactured to a spec, an old world type of spec that you frankly don't see nowadays. Of course, I'm talking about like the Bulgarian Circle 10 series, the SLR 104 FR and out 104 URs. I'm talking about even the Saigas because those were an AK-100 series base. I'm talking about the Norinkos, the old school Polytechs. I'm talking about the Wassers, the rifles that came out of factories that would have otherwise had supplied militaries and, let's say, military adjacent organizations in the past. And so that's also the other point, you know, the large-scale military adoption of the current, the particular model, or does it have a cool story behind it? And does it have pop culture supporting it? The Krink, the AKS-74U, where do I start? Helicopter PDW used by the KGB significantly. It is the submachine gun du jour. It was highly prized in Afghanistan, highly prized in a lot of conflict areas because it meant that you got someone, you defeated someone who was someone. And ultimately, of course, it's known as the Osama in some circles for particular reasons. Things like this make the mind of the AK consumer back then tick. That's what attracted people to want to buy things like this. But the biggest secret ingredient on why these things sold, or why people were attracted to these things, the secret ingredient, ladies and gentlemen, was crime. Now, I'm not saying that the AK community was prone to committing crime. Well, maybe some of them are. I don't know. But I'm saying the aspect and the association to crime that these things had a lot of times was attractive to people like that. And I am people like that. It is an interesting story that you're able to tell. You can talk a lot about that. You're holding a piece of history of crime. Now, how does that reflect to the current AK market? Now, the current AK market is, I would say, very bland, and it's not very academically focused, i.e., there's not a lot of care in the historical development of AKs. I mean, you put a KNS piston into any of these things and just go to town with it. Use an FN cold hammer forged barrel inside of these things. There's not a lot of care to it. And it's driven by a lot of profit. And I'm not saying that companies should not be driven by profit. You're an American company. That should be your number one imperative. But they're profit driven without a lot of academic base, i.e. they don't do a lot of research on the historical development of these things. I.e. you're making AK-101 series rifles without bump rivet. That's like a cardinal sin to AK people. You're making an AK-100 series with an AKM bolt. Some of these things are the things that are disenchanting to the AK community. Let's say, like, if you make a Krink, this is not how the SLR 104 UR came, and yet this is how I kitted it out. Why? Because this is the military loadout of a Tula, which is the original manufacturing location of the AKS-74Us. This is where it was manufactured, and because it had an older barrel twist, I used the older first-gen type of handguards to kit this one out, to better represent an early AKS-74U. Let's see, I should be using plum magazines, which I did get a nice Tula plum grip with a lot of flex inside of it. The sling is different from an AK-74 normal mustard sling. It is slimmer. The stock is also different from an AKS-74 stock because it is curled inwards. Which is a signature of the Tula AK S74U. A lot of these things are things that the AK community guys back then would academically try to track down and learn about these things. And yet, the new ones, you're not afforded with that because it is a commercialized product as a facsimile to what was developed. And that saddens a lot of the people from the AK community. Frankly, the biggest crime committed by these, probably just tax fraud, which doesn't sit right with the AK community from that era. So, what about the rollered delayed systems that I'm talking about? So, roller delayed versus AK. Why do I think the current roller delayed offerings, or the ones that are coming into country, why do I think these roller delayed offerings could potentially be a rallying point for older AK enthusiasts? Allow me to explain. Now, this is a genuine H&K, HK53. So this is not the Turkish import, but those are coming in, and I'm hoping to get my hands on one of those to see what kind of differences there were. So roller delayed firearms, like this H&K, typically are from the same factory that supplied military and law enforcement agencies. They are actually made with a stamped receiver. This is a fairly difficult receiver to stamp, whereas the AK, if you look inside of it, looks like an angle iron with some stuff welded inside of it. This was not an easy thing for the Russians to come to conclusion as a final product, because remember when they first started stamping these in the Type 1s, they had issues. They had a millet for the Type 2 and Type 3 before they got to the AKM, which is when they mass started stamping these things. Whereas let's say the roller delayed systems had some origins that the current German people don't want to bring up. People currently also look at the roller delayed systems like it's some kind of a black magic, like they did when they saw AKs in the 1980s. These things work on a really interesting mechanical system that I think those mechanical workings make the AK people, their minds tick. It's really interesting to see how you translate a gasless system to work fairly reliably, and the reliability between these two things are second to none. Now, HK53s, some people may say it's kind of stupid because it's got an 8-inch barrel. Okay, that does not affect its desirability to own, but I also think that it shares a lot of traits that I outlined what attracts the AK community. These are made in military facilities. I'm not talking about the American clones. PTR I could talk about maybe in a different video. I am recently very, very disappointed with some of the PTR's manufacturing stuff. Let me know in the comments if you want me to cover why I'm disappointed in PTR in the first place. But think of the manufacturing of these things. The stuff that you use to fabricate and work on AKs, the tools, are very similar to the ones you would work on H&Ks. You're talking about what? Presses, welders, grinding stuff? That is a very similar manufacturing technique as opposed to the AR-15s, which is the alloy receiver with a completely different system to assemble rather than build. The stamped receiver is, AKs are also running on stamped receivers, although this is much more complex to make. The AKs kind of looks like an angled iron with some stuff welded in between. It's more complicated than you think, but the shape of this receiver is actually quite complicated with, I might add, dubious origins, but I'll get to that. It does have large-scale military adoption. Of course, the Germans famously used the G3. The UK used a lot of the L101, A1, A2s, which is the HK53s. The HK33s are also used a lot in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia. But what did I say? The big thing, the big attraction that AK people had to these things? They're attracted to crime. Specifically the HK33, not the 53, sort of the 53 as well, but the HK33 was one of the sketchier employments around the world. I mean, it's mainly there was a lot of employment in South America. The Mexicans used it. The G3, specifically the Portuguese FMP G3s were used in all sorts of places in Africa and still used in many places in Africa and still work despite the horrible conditions they are in. And if you're thinking about also the East Germans famously used the HK33, the Disenchantment 9, which is the GSG 9 we have at home. Really nasty fellas. They would be the one who tracked down defectors and would interrogate them. Interrogate's a nice word for what they actually did to them. But they basically mirrored the GSG 9 and procured a lot of HK33s, PSG1s, and high-end H&K items through South America and used them in East Germany, which also brought up a lot of concerns from the West German authorities on why H&K, why are you selling our enemies these guns? And turns out they weren't, but turns out they were dealing with other people in some places that were not, they weren't selling them to Disneyland staff. The Russians used MP5s. The Pakistanis had MP5s, which some of them the Soviets found in Afghanistan. The Turks. Talk about a very storied and ethically challenged use of G3s and HK33s. There's a lot of conflict on the Syrian, Turkey, and Kurdish border. A lot of really nasty stories going on around there. The suicide triggers that the Turks came up with. Suffice to say, crime is intimately associated with these. On top of that, this was well used in Northern Ireland by the SAS as a car PDW. So they would break their way out of firing their way out of a vehicle ambush if they were in the position of being fired upon in an ambush by the IRA, or they would use these to nab unsuspecting targets and tangos. But anyways, yes, so the stamped receiver HK33 and G3 certainly had a significant employment around the world. It was used by a lot of countries. Some of them were very unscrupulous enjoyers and users of these systems, all the way to very hoity-toity Swiss and German authorities who used them. It was an equal opportunist weapon system. Let's just say that. And so the roller delayed market, while PTR is not particularly doing amazing in it, these were set up to easily have the cocking tube and barrels refitted for a different model. So let's say the Turks are coming out with the 53s and 51s, so the pistol 8-inch barrel version of these things, which is 5.56 is even kind of stretching it. 7.62 is just downright horrid to have. However, you could talk to a gunsmith. Like I work with my guy Mike over at 19 Charlie all the time, and I have him do things like, let's switch out the cocking tube, let's switch out the barrel, and come up with a completely new system. I did that with the MP5 SD that I have. I used a Turkish MKE import before I knew that they were making the SDs to import, which is, again, they also made the HK53s. So that's a little bit of a sore spot for me. But what I am trying to say is these things literally check all the boxes. The way they're manufactured, also stamped receiver, interesting operating system. Manual of arms, very translatable. Iron sights, very usable. The Turkish imports, at least, even more sketchy. The POF imports, these are made by manufacturing facilities that are military suppliers that use the HK blueprints with the material specs and tolerances clearly outlined on equipment that they use. Now, those may be an older generation of the blueprints, but still the blueprints nonetheless, kind of like an AKM manufacturer versus a 100 series AK manufacturer. It's called widespread adoption around the world, but most importantly, I think to the AK community, why they would like something like this is because it is closely associated with crime, war crimes, or actual crime, if you really look into it. So I'll leave that with you here. I haven't talked to my friends, let's say like in the AK community, like Brandon Herrera or Clayco, although I was successful in getting Clay interested in MP5s, and I know Brandon himself enjoys MP5s and keeps one as his bedside subgun. So I should ask them about their thoughts on the AK community taking refuge in the roller delayed community, which is not the roller lock community. That's the MG3, the roller delayed community. I think there's a place and there's enough parallels between the roller delayed system and the AK system. But I'm actually curious. I don't know. This is a theory that's been rattling in my mind for a while. What do you think? Do you think there is enough of a parallel between these? Am I off my rocker with this? I don't know. Tell me. I think there's enough parallel between, for the AK community or the old school AK enjoyers to find joy, because this has been sparking joy for me. We'll see you around. Hallo. This is a rolling object. Such an easy solution for weight bearing and the transfer of momentum. This concept is elegantly incorporated in some of these finest small arms in the world. Natürlich aus Deutschland. Now I hope you are enjoying the show so far. Shows like this, of course, they're brought to you by Slate's Black Industries. But more importantly, we have the support of the patrons of Patreon and Utreon. That's right. This magnificent group of men and women, they support us financially, intellectually, but most importantly, emotionally. So today I'd like to invite you. Come, join us, become one of us. Zusammen, we will conquer the Welt in small arms development. But if you cannot, we completely understand. We will be just as happy to see you put a comment in the comment section below. But I must say, for now, let's get on with it.
716 is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green, top copy, over.
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel 91,